Michael Nagel, Salt Life, says on his 2013 Yamaha 150, it has 800 hours on it. Just after a service at the dealership, the engine started shaking at low RPM on the first trip out. Any input? Thanks. Michael, thank you for subscribing. Thank you for commenting. This is a great question. We also want to thank our show sponsor that is bringing you this content. Partsview.com is truly a boat and outboard parts superstore. They have 20, 100, and 300-hour service kits for Mercury, Yamaha, Suzuki, Mercruiser. That gives you all the things that you could need for your maintenance in a convenient kit. You can get a $15 discount on $150 or $50 discount on $500 orders at the link in the description below. And back to Michael's question. Most likely you've got a problem with the prop, Michael. This is always a super simple question. It's a lot simpler than you might think. Basically, when they put the prop back on, something might not be correct. So either the prop's not tight or they're missing a washer or something like that. Because if you got 800 hours on your outboard and you've had no problems, but you get a service done and now all of a sudden you have a vibration that is only at low idle, and then once you get up, above say 1200 RPM or 1000 RPM, then the vibration goes away. That tells you it's a propeller problem and something just got missed. Man, they put the prop down, maybe a washer fell down or whatever the case may be. But I would say 9 out of 10, the issue is going to be in your propeller. That's what really you get most of the vibrations at idle are. It's prop chatter is basically what it is. But a loose prop or a broken blade on a prop or a bent propeller blade, those are going to be the things that give you a vibration at low RPM, because that's your connection point with the water. And if that propeller is not, the way it's supposed to be, perfectly centered or with no marks or no dings or no bends or anything like that, it's going to have a smooth turn. But as soon as the prop is not stuck in place or it can wobble or a blade is bent or anything like that, that's going to throw it out of being symmetrical, I guess you'd say, or running smooth, and that's going to cause a vibration that you're going to feel on, the outboard up as you're running it. Other causes of an outboard shaking at low RPM is usually a misfire, whether that be from a spark plug, an ignition coil, a fuel injector, low fuel pressure, anything like that. If you've got a misfire or you have a cylinder that is not firing, it's not getting fuel, whatever the case may be, that is going to throw off the balance of your engine, whether that's an inline engine or a V engine. As soon as you have a misfire or a running problem where one of your cylinders is not firing, it's going to throw off the balance of the engine, which is going to create a vibration, and it's going to be usually shaking at low RPM because that cylinder is not firing and you're off balance, basically. Those are going to be the main reasons you're going to see a vibration at low RPM. I would say that most of them, you're going to be able to tell a running issue because the RPM is going to be sporadic on your tachometer. It might go from 700 to 900 to 850 to, 1,000, and it's going to be bouncing all over the place between 100 to 200 RPM. It's not going to be able to hold a steady RPM of, say, 750 or 650, depending on the engine mile that you have. At idle, with everything running good, your RPM is going to be pretty set in stone. It's not going to vary much. It might change 50 RPM at the maximum, I guess you would say. But as soon as you throw in a running issue, a lot of times it can bounce around from 100 to 200 RPM in that range, so that's going to tell you that you're not firing on one cylinder. A lot of modern four-strokes, though, they are controlled by the computer, so if it notices anything like that with the use of O2 sensors and other things like that, they're pretty good about steadying the RPM. Even if you've got a cylinder down, you might not see any change in the RPM, but you can hear it, and you can also see a lot of times that vibration. You might even be able to feel it depending on your boat. How big of a boat is it, and does it have a bracket, or is the engine mounted directly to the transom? Those kinds of things are going to change how much of a vibration that you feel. But also, most of the modern engines that have been built in the past 20 years are built pretty set in nice cradles and adapter plates that will absorb a lot of the vibrations, so you might not see it unless you kind of have a feel for it and have a sound for it and kind of like can tell the way your engine normally runs compared to if it does have a misfire. But other than that, a shaking at low RPM, most of the time it's going to be a propeller issue, because that's what is going to throw everything off. As soon as you throw off the balance of the propeller, it's going to move that hole. It's going to be putting torque and pressure on the engine, and it's going to be wiggling around. It's going to create a vibration. Now, Kevin Johnson says broken bolts are a nightmare. Heat, penetrating oil like Kroll, PB Blaster, or 50/50 trans or 505. I'm guessing you went 50/50. Transmission fluid and acetone and an impact driver are a must when working on steel bolts that thread into aluminum parts. I love PB Blaster. I love Kroll. Everybody knows that. I mean, Kroll's probably my favorite of all the penetrating oils, but I did not know about the 50/50 transmission fluid and acetone. That is something new to me. Or 505. It's got to be 50/50. I don't know what 505 would be, but I've never heard of that. That's pretty intense. I'm gonna have to try that and check that out. Thank you, Kevin, for that information. That's a good tip. I mean, learn something new. Walish, here in Sweden, when we say freeboard, we are referring to the outside of the hull above the waterline to the top of the hull, not just from the waterline to the deck. Would have thought you meant the same. Yeah, Walish, this is actually a pretty good comment and actually a pretty good question, because I guess really it depends on the boat that you're talking about. So you're going to have half the people arguing on this side and half the people arguing on this side on whether it's to the top of the gunnels, being the hull, like you're saying, from the waterline to the top of the gunnels, or from the waterline to the deck. And honestly, I think it's probably going to be determined based on the type of boat we're talking about. So if you are talking about, say, a sport fish, on a sport fish that has big, huge drains on the back of the boat, where, water comes in the boat and it all drains off the deck, or crab boats, stuff like that, different kinds of boats where the deck is super exposed to the water, I think you would consider the freeboard from the waterline to the deck, because that's how water gets in the boat. Whereas, say, on a sailboat, your freeboard is going to be from the waterline to the rails or your gunnels, the top of the hull, where water's going to come in. So I guess really maybe freeboard is more considered, wherever water's going to be getting in the boat compared to the waterline, and that would be considered your freeboard. I'm not a boat builder, so maybe someone else knows a lot more about it can drop it in the comments and let us all know whether we're right or wrong when we're talking about this, and whether or not it is from where water can get in the boat, or from the waterline, or is it strictly from the top of the gunnels or from the deck. So I've heard it all three ways. Which one is 100% correct? I would say it's considered based on the type of boat that you have, and I think it's more of where water's going to come in the boat. So like if you got some kind of a crab boat that has the whole back opened up and there's drains all the way out off from the deck, I think the freeboard is going to be based on that deck to the water line, again, compared to the sailboat that has, you got to get the water up over the tops of the gunnels in order to get in the boat. So maybe it's determined on the type of boat that you have. Mancamp 1000 says, I also worked on a Polaris some years ago where the actual jet cone, or let's just call it the tube, is lined with a stainless steel and the jet propeller is in the middle. Will that whole fuselage swells, pushes the stainless steel inward, and the jet impeller or blade won't even spin. A lot of disassembling, sanding, put it back together, right it, and it will do it again. If the thing sits in the water, no matter salt or fresh, aluminum expands as it corrodes and then turns to chalk. That's something that a lot of people might not think about. That is true. You see that on a lot with other metals as well. So as metal, depending on the type of metal that it is, and also as corrosion and salt buildup, stuff like that, you see this where he's talking about where the impeller is, and it's in this casting basically that's aluminum, and as it's corroding, it's squeezing it in like this to where it locks up that propeller and it can't turn. You see this on a lot of outboards where we're talking about shift shafts and stuff like that, even water tubes on smaller engines on certain models. Where the water tube comes up, the water tube is either a brass or a copper type of, or a bronze material. And at the top where it goes in the power head, it's got an O-ring that sits around it. Some of them sit in a gasket, some of them have an O-ring around them, and there's so much water that flows through there. In heavy salt use with no flushing or anything like that, what will happen is when you turn the engine off, now there's water sitting up there on that gasket. It's eating around the metal of the gasket and also building up salt around it. So as the salt builds up, the water goes in, and if it's just sitting there, no flow, no nothing, a little bit of water is going to be able to get behind that gasket. The water is going to dissolve and leave behind the salt crystals. So as those salt crystals continue to build up in that area, it squeezes that in. So if this is your tube, it's going to be squeezing it in. And now all of a sudden you've got an overheat at idle because you're losing water pressure because you've got a messed up water tube that is being squeezed in by the corrosion. Same thing for shift shafts. It's more about a salt issue than it is the metal corroding, but metal will do the same thing. Aluminum, stuff like that. As the thing's corroding, it is expanding because it's basically building stuff up on top of it. There's probably a better way to explain that, but it does expand as it corrodes, turns to chalk, and then dissolves away. So we've all seen that. That's a good point to talk about and to think about. The shift shaft, same thing. If you've got a shifting issue, certain models will have that shift shaft going through a grommet, and same thing. If it doesn't get rinsed out, doesn't get cleaned over 15, 20-year progression, that buildup will squeeze that grommet, and then boom, it'll lock up your shift shaft, and now all of a sudden you've got a stiff shifting problem or you're getting shifting codes where you tell the engine to go into gear and it's electronically controlled. The actuator tries to shift it, but it can't shift it because the shift shaft is jammed on that grommet. So that's a very good comment. Mr. Wallaland, you can test the Ridlime effectiveness with pH. They have a tech document on the website. Once it reaches 5 to 7 pH, the solution is used up and you need to replace it. Interesting, Mr. Wallaland. I didn't know that. So it is a pH level type of solution. So there you go. If you are using Ridlime and you want to know the effectiveness of it, it is based on a pH level. So get yourself a pH tester. You can get those on Amazon for $10. You can get them at Home Depot, stuff like that. So very good, very good. HFHF says, hello, sir. Hello, HF. I have a question. If you don't mind to answer this, I'm working on an idea of making a twin rudder boat. I'm having a trouble to make the rudder that can operate both simultaneously and individually with only a single steering. Is it possible to make it with this hydraulic steering? That's a good question. I don't think it's possible because the only way I would see that being possible is with something like stick steering. The issue that you have, unless you could use two helms somehow, but no, it's not gonna. It's not gonna work. You're not gonna be able to have one steering wheel that controls two steering cylinders that you can change from running one to not running the other one. I mean, technically you could do this, but you would have to have an external T-valve. So actually, there's probably two ways that you could do it. It's going to be work, obviously, and it's not going to be a simple turning of the steering wheel and then flipping a switch, but you could put a valve in there that could make it work. One way that I would say is, depending on how big of the boat, if you're using rudders and inboards, this option might not work. If you're using outboards, it would. So you can get hydraulic stick steering. What do they call it? The hydro sticks or something like that. I'd have to look it up. It's a hydro stick, I believe, and that is a stick steering that's hydraulic. So basically you have a stick, and as you move it, one way or the other, it will turn the engine with a stick. So you'd have two cylinders on the rudders or the outboards. Usually it's for outboards. I think it goes up to like a 150 horsepower, maybe a 90. It's not for a lot of horsepower with that stick steering, but I think you can go to 150 maybe. I'm not 100% sure. But again, it's a stick and you've got a cylinder. So if you have two outboards, you have two cylinders, and you'd have two sticks. So you'd have two sticks like this. You can move one, move the other, and you can move your outboards like that. You could probably use it for a rudder. You would have to fabricate it to make it work, but I don't know if it would be powerful enough because it can only be used up to like a 150, I think. And if it's only up to a 150, if you're using inboards and a rudder and you've got enough of a boat to have twin inboards, that's going to be a pretty substantially sized boat that I don't know if you'd have the power. But on like outboards, if you have, say, a catamaran and you have two cylinders on each side, you can have a T valve. This is kind of how you bleed it. And that T valve is how you can change it from being, looped over between the two cylinders that operate them all together. So it comes from the helm down this side, through the cylinder, up and over to the other cylinder, through that cylinder and up to the helm again. That's how the system is working right now. And it's turning both engines like this. And when I say engines, think rudder, same thing. It's still a hydraulic cylinder moving something. And then there's a T-valve here. When you change that over, that's how you align it, and then also part of how you can bleed the system. So that's going to have a return line basically to it. You could probably do something very similar where up in the helm, you would put valves on the helm. You might have to, I don't know, if you wanted to do them individually, because you only be able to control one. If you have one valve and you turn it, you're only going to be able to move one engine or one rudder. If you put two in there, you could probably separate them to where you can maneuver where the fluid's going to flow and be able to move them simultaneously, and then also put them in a position that will let them move together. How you're going to keep them aligned, that is a whole nother question, because I guess the alignment on a rudder, you could put a reference on it. A lot of boats have a rudder reference that show you where the rudder's at, but also you might have to, the system's already way too complicated as it is, and not sure exactly where you're trying to achieve here, but doing that's probably much the only way that you're going to be able to do it is put valves in there. If you got rudder references, if you do not have a rudder reference, then you would have to, every time you want to realign your rudders, you would have to open the valves, turn them both all the way over to one side, and then close them off to make them run again individually. So it sounds like a really, really complicated system. That's the only way that I could personally think of you being able to do that, to control two separate rudders independently with one steering wheel, and then at the same time be able to use them both jointly. Very complicated system for, I think, what you're really trying to achieve. It might not be worth it. Walish has another question. He says, the problem you're referring to with the deck drain is not really a problem as long as you have a valve or some type of plug for it. When the boat is empty at the dock, the rain, etc. can easily drain out. If you load up the boat with people and gear, you just close the valve. Also useful if your drain ports are located on the transom, which is common. Here you close them to keep water from entering when going in reverse, or a swell from letting off the gas too quickly. So this is talking about putting too much weight on the back of a boat and having the deck drains go down under the water. Take an older boat like a 17 or something like that that's got a 70 horse two-stroke, and you put on a 90 horse four-stroke. The weight of the four-stroke is generally going to sink the bottom of the boat or the back of the boat down in the water. A lot of times it puts the deck drains under the water, which creates a problem. And he's talking about plugging it. So it's not just an issue of being at the dock. It's also an issue of running it. So you're correct. You can put, the plugs out when it's at the dock. If it rains, the rain will go out. Not as big of a deal, but as soon as you put gear and people in there and those go underwater and you plug them, now all of a sudden you have an issue of when you use the boat. So if you're getting in and out of the water, you're bringing a lot of water in the boat. If you're out there and you're fishing, if you're pulling fish in the boat and you're spraying the blood off, you're putting a lot of water in the boat. If you are out there snorkeling, diving, any of that stuff, sandbar, any of those things, getting in and out of the boat or fishing or anything like that, spray as you're running along. When you get spray that comes in over the boat, you're going to have water in the boat. Like, it's very difficult to have a boat that never gets any water in the boat. I mean, that's a difficult situation. At the dock, I mean, yeah, that's not that big of a deal, but when you're actually using the boat, it's also an issue there. But if you look at the older, like, whalers and stuff like that, I mean, whaler's probably the best one to use. So look at an 80s, 90s, 22 or 18 Boston whaler, the skinny ones, 17, whatever, all the different models that they made. All those boats had that transom with the big cutout, and it had that splash well in there, but they were always getting water in there. So if you're out fishing or something like that, and you're standing in the back of the boat, especially if you got a 4-stroke on there moving from a 2-stroke to the 4-stroke, the back of those boats were always wet. Water always coming in, and it only had a little like lip on the back of the boat. So you had the splash well, like here's your transom, here's the splash well, and there's this little like bump here that was to stop water. As soon as you're trying to get fish in the boat or whatever, and you get into a sea that's got waves coming on the back of the boat, you'll fill that boat up with water like that. It's quick. So those you'd have to always be in driving in order to get the water to flow to the back of the boat and out the drains. Always a pain. It was always an issue. So you have to be able to get the water out of the boat or be living with the water in the boat. And a Boston whaler is unsinkable because it's foam, so it works there. But if you got another boat that isn't unsinkable and you can't get that water out of the boat, like, on a whaler, there's basically no bilge. But if you talk about like a 17 Mako or something like that, there is a bilge. I mean, that you're looking at other issues. So there's other issues than just the dock. At the dock for sure, but when you're actually using the boat, you're going to have a lot of water in there, and it's a big risk, I think is the bigger deal. One fishing addict. Suzuki's have a drain on the port side bottom cylinder. Keep the engine up a bit, allow water drain out of the head, keep it down. Keeping it down will result in buildup and corrosion on the bottom 4-cylinder block head. That is a good point that people don't think about whenever you are letting an engine sit, especially in salt water. There are cavities inside the engine, so if you don't tilt the engine up, it does not allow it to drain. So if you say you keep your boat on a lift or something like that, you pull the boat on the lift and you pull the lift up and you leave your engines completely vertical, you could have spots, or if it has negative trim to it, even worse. So now, like you're saying, in Suzuki's, they have the drain on the port side on the bottom. If you don't have it tilted up a little bit, then you'll have water pool up in the back that'll start to corrode parts of the engine. So it's a good practice to have. If you have an engine and you keep it on lift or anything like that, always trim that thing up. When you leave it, you kind of want to leave it trimmed up a little bit, or at least whenever you flush it, you want to flush it with a little bit of trim, or after you flush it. You don't have to trim it when you flush it, but after you flush it, you want to trim it a little bit, let all that water drain out. Something else to think about too is that engines that have, smoky startups, this is also kind of an issue where if as soon as you turn the engine off, if it's completely vertical or it has negative trim, the oil that is on the back of the cylinder walls will leak down the cylinder walls, and it'll run through the rings, through your compression rings and your wiper rings into the cylinder head. Well, not the head, but into the cylinders. So now you have a little pool of oil sitting in the head. So when you start the engine, boom, it fires up, burns that oil. It'll have a smoky start, and you'll be consuming oil. So over a 100-hour period, you might have consumed a decent amount of oil. So same thing, you can fight that by just trimming the engine up a little bit. That way it drains any of that oil out, and you don't have the smoky startups, or less of a smoky startup. So good comment, Fishing Addict. Del Step says, "Hi, my brother." Hello, Del. I am Presently repairing a 17-foot Mako. The stringers are rotting and there are dry spots in the woven roving on the floor. I know I have to repair those, but the side of the boat sounds a bit hollow. The side are originally done with woven roving too. I am wondering if the hollow sound in the sides need to be strengthened as well. Please let me know your thoughts. So on the Mako, a lot of those had foam on the gunnels, so they would have a hollow sound, especially like in the middle where they have, most of them have those cutouts where you would put fishing rods, your gaff, boat poles, stuff like that. There'll be inserts in the side of the gunnel. So you have your gunnels, and in the middle, they have inserts that are like this like plastic type thing, and you could use it for rod storage. But other than that, most of them are foamed around the gunnels, so you would hit it and it sounds kind of hollow, but it's not really hollow. It's just, it's glass. There's nothing there. It's not like, I mean, it's structural, but it's not structural. It's not like it's a foam cord, thing. It's just glass. And then you've got foam and then you got glass. So there is nothing really that could go hollow. Now on the stringers and the transom, 100%, those need to be fixed. Anytime you got dry fiberglass, that's a problem. So that would definitely need to be fixed. But your stringers are going to be made out of wood, and the transom is going to be made out of wood depending on the year of the boat. So that would all have to be addressed. And if the wood rots out and that gets hollow, that's a structural part of the boat. And now that is a serious issue that you are going to need to fix 100%. So on the sides, I wouldn't worry too much about the sides. I don't think that if that's what you're talking, if you're talking about the gunnels, then I don't think that's going to be a problem. I would look at the cap under the rub rail. So under the rub rail where the cap sticks down on the hull, those sometimes would have problems. If those split, when you're going in the water, you can get water up the sides of the gunnels, hits the rub rail, goes in under the cap, and then fills the boat with water. So that could be a potential problem, and I would definitely be looking at that. But as far as your gunnels are concerned, I don't think the hollow sound that you're hearing, it's not like it's a transom. It's not going to have a coring material that is rotted out that is now giving you this hollow sound when you knock on it. It's going to be more of an issue of it's just glass. It's just glass with foam behind it, so it's going to have that sound. A. Rodriguez, about seafoam, do you also not like it for two strokes? My mechanic friend has been pushing me towards the mercury additive, but I've been stubborn. I'm probably not the biggest fan of seafoam. I'm more a fan of the Quick Clean, Mercury Quick Clean, and Yamaha Ring Free. I think those two are phenomenal products. Yes, 2 strokes and 4 strokes, both are going to have their benefits. On the 2-stroke, it's definitely depending on how you're doing it, because 2 strokes you're adding the oil to the fuel, so you don't want to get too much. Whenever you talk about using a 2-stroke, the fuel that you're providing, you can get yourself into a predicament. I have not made it yet, but I am working on a video right now talking about ethanol and that kind of issue. So based on the octane rating of the fuel and the additives that you're putting in the fuel, so if you start putting in, let's say you use an ethanol fuel with 10% ethanol, you're using an additive like a seafoam or a Quick Clean or an octane boost or anything like that, you are messing with the lubrication, because one, oil doesn't stick to ethanol, so you got a problem there. And then 2, you're putting a cleaner in it that's going to clean oil off, so you're basically losing lubrication. I think using a Quick Clean or a Ring Free with your 2-stroke is going to be fine. But if you're using ethanol and other additives, then be careful with that situation. Other than that, yeah, I mean, Seafoam's an all right product. I'm not the biggest fan of it, depending on how you're using it. I've just always used Quick Clean and Ring Free, so I don't have, any kind of serious testing that has been done with comparing the 3. Quick Clean is probably the cheapest. It's just as good as Ring Free, in my opinion. Ring Free is kind of expensive, but outstanding product. So yeah, I'm with your mechanic. I think using the quick clean and the ring free or the ring free would be very, very good for your engine. But if you're using ethanol and you're using additives, just be cautious on that. If you're pre-mixing your fuel, you've got things to think about with a two-stroke. If you're pre-mixing your fuel and you only have ethanol fuel available, which you're not talking about that here, but it is something that I do want to say. I mean, you need to have that in consideration, that oil does not stick to ethanol, and ethanol is basically a cleaner. So if you do not have your mixtures right, you could be under lubricating your engine or creating an issue with that thought in mind. Tonchito, can dirty high pressure pump filter be why engine is surging over 3,000 RPM or injector? Tonchito, yes, 100%. A dirty high pressure pump filter could cause you all kinds of running issues, especially over 3,000 RPM, because you're losing fuel. So anytime you are losing wide open throttle or you're not getting over, say, 3,000 RPM, most outboards have an RPM band of, like, let's say 5,000 RPM to 6,000 RPM. And if you're only getting to 3,000, you are 2,000 to 3,000 RPM under what you should be at. Depending on your engine model, are you in a guardian mode? Do you have codes? Do you have stuff like that? If that's kind of, something that's happening, then you could be in an RPM reduction. But if you have no codes, no alarms, you're just putting the handle down and it's only going to 3,000 RPM, most of the time that is going to be a fuel related issue, and it's going to be a volume issue. I'm sure if the engine is surging, it's going to be bogging down, it's going to be surging, it's going to be shaking violently because it's not got fuel. You have lost your volume and fuel. An injector, yes, if you've got multiple clogged injectors, yes, but most likely you're not getting the volume of fuel, which means your high pressure pump, there's a screen on the bottom of it. If that screen is completely dirty, if your VST or your FSM is full of fuel, but it's not getting to that pump, you're not getting it to the engine, then you're going to be surging and it's going to be shaking. You're not going to get over 3,000 RPM based on what you're saying, because there is not fuel there for the engine to burn. So 100% Tonchito. I would check the filter first, and then after you check the filter, then I would look at injectors. But most likely, one injector is not going to lose half your RPM, but no fuel will. Unless you also, it could be an electrical issue, but definitely check your fuel first. I would look at the fuel system before I even start going and looking at, anything electrical. I'm a doofus says, what got you into boats? It was fishing, wasn't it? Really it was the water. So anything on the water got me into boats. Water sports, fishing, diving, snorkeling, the sandbars, just going out and being on the water, just swimming, just being anywhere near the water. That's kind of what got me into it. I love the water, love to be around the water, love to do things on the water. So all the above is what got me into boats. Eric Nearing says, I'm not saying nothing about the little kickstand, but if you transom in your engine mount can't hold the engine up, what are you going to do in waves? That was always my thought. So talking about your little kickstand on the engine. So when you trim the engine up, there's a little kickstand there that is used for service purposes. For one, don't trailer it on that because it will snap. But also on your thought, though, as far as the engine and holding it and all that kind of stuff, one thing that you got to think about is the give that you get in the water. So let's say, a ladder. A ladder is a really good example of this. So if you take a boat that's out of the water and it's on the transom, or not on the transom, but it's on the trailer, there's no give. When the boat's out of the water, it's on the rack, there's no give, there's nothing. And you take your ladder and you put your ladder in there, a heavier person could bend the ladder. Say a 250 pound, 300 pound person is going to bend that ladder when it's out of the water. But when the boat is in the water, it gives. So you've got the boat in the water and the ladder's like this. When you stand on the ladder, the whole boat's going to go down and the ladder's going to get vertical like this. So there is no bend there. Whereas when the boat is stuck on a rack or on a trailer, there's no give. It's just solid. So when you stand on the ladder takes all the weight, which bends the ladder because it's gravity and it's weight. You've got a torque and a fulcrum point basically, and you bend that metal like that. Same thing for your engine. When you're in the water, there's give to it. So like when you get on the ladder and you're in the water, when you get on the ladder, the boat goes down in the water, the ladder gets completely vertical and it's not going to bend because that's just, I guess it's physics, I guess. But you think about that. So same thing with transoms. In the water, there's not as much stress being put on the transom as it is when it's out of the water because there's no give there now. So that is something to think about. As far as the kickstand goes, 100% don't. For trailering it, no, you're going to snap it because there's no give. So, but when you're using it for a service thing or you're doing anything with the engine, that's what it's there for. All it is to hold the weight. But whenever you are trailering it, now all of a sudden you've got this little kickstand and the weight of the engine, and there's bounce. Now all of a sudden you're going down the road and there's bouncing with that weight, 600-700 pounds depending on the engine. That's all on that little stand. You're going to snap that stand. So that's kind of the topic there. Eric Nearing's got another one. PVC, my boys. PVC I just did in my boat. I did the front half 2 years ago, and I love it. Way cheaper than Starboard. So talking about using things on the boat, he is talking about PVC board. I'm actually working on a video of this. This is what my experience has been on the PVC. So PVC board is like 3 times less the price of Starboard. Starboard is going to be 3 times the cost of PVC board. You could get a 4x8 sheet of 1/2-inch PVC board for $100 at Home Depot, Lowe's, wherever. Starboard, a 4x8 sheet of Starboard is probably going to cost you $300, if not a little bit more. I haven't checked Starboard for a full sheet in a while. It could be more. So it's like 3 times the cost. Now, Starboard is HPDE or high pressure density, whatever it is. It's HPDE. I can't think of the exact thing off the top of my head of what that stands for, but that Starboard is high pressure density, whatever board, polyethylene or whatever. That is going to withstand UV rays, sunlight, heat, and scratches a lot better. PVC board is a lot lighter, and it is also not as scratch resistant. So you can scratch it a lot easier. You can damage it a lot easier. It does not hold up to the UV rays and the sunlight. So if it's exposed to sun for a long time, I don't think it holds up as well as Starboard does. So there's that consideration there. In my opinion, we use a lot of PVC board, but we use it for backing plates. So when you're making stuff in the boat, we use it for a backing plate. So if you're mounting electronics, you're mounting filter brackets, you're mounting whatever, radar hubs, battery chargers, junction bars, splice bars, bus bars, whatever it may be, PVC board is light and it's waterproof, it's plastic. So it makes for an excellent backing board. I am working on that video. I just have not got it done yet. So that'll be coming real soon. Shingnosis. We run a professional charter fleet, several thousand hours of hard use in different hands. Honda, Yamaha, Mercury, Suzuki, Evinrude. Stay away from brand new products. Preferably buy something which has been on the market for at least 2 years. 100%. 100%. I agree with you all the way. Whenever you're buying a brand new product, you're buying a flagship product that has not been tested in the field, and you will not know how that is going to hold up over time with use and abuse in general market compared to an R&D in, a controlled environment, I guess you'd say. Like You know, one thing to show, like if you want to see how something's going to hold up, put it in, like in the boating world. In the boating world, you put it in a rental fleet. Then you're going to know how that product is going to hold up. Because if you get, 3 people that know how to use a boat to use a product, that product's probably going to last a long time. But if you take that same product and you let 400 people that have no idea how to use that product, one of them, they're going to figure out how to bust that thing. So that's how you're going to learn a lot of stuff. I would wait on any flagship product, doesn't matter what it is. Car, truck, boat, ATV, doesn't matter, whatever it is. Anything that's brand spanking new, a flagship, yeah, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be cool, but there is a risk factor of we don't know how it's going to hold up in the market in different situations. So I'm with you. I agree. I have that same train of thought, and that's the way I think about it too. We'll do one more from Keenan Clark. He says, big fan of the show up here in Washington State. Thank you, Keenan. I have a 2006 Verado 150, and I am having problems with what I believe is something to do with the DTS. Sometimes when I go to put the boat in gear and throttle up, the alarm will sound solid beep, but I will have no codes on my Vessel View mobile app until I throttle up, and it will give me a Guardian mode code. So one thing before we go on, the Vessel View mobile app it's all right. I mean, it's cool, but it's only going to give you engine data. Like it's going to give you, RPM and stuff like that. I think it gives you trim angle, kind of that stuff. It's very basic data. It's not going to give you extensive data, especially when we go talking about codes, because there are hundreds of codes that could pop up on an engine with all kinds of things that could be wrong. So the mobile app, though it's cool, as far as what you see as a code, it's going to probably give you a universal code. It's just a blank code that could be caused by 6 other different codes. So what you see on your app, it says Guardian mode, but you have no idea why it's in Guardian mode or what's causing that or anything like that. So, it's hit or miss with that app. That's one thing I'll throw out there right now real quick. Some days the motor runs, shifts, and revs up perfect, but other days it's constantly alarming, and I will reset it by turning the engine off, waiting 5 seconds, and turning it back on. I've cleaned electrical plugs, power, grounds, etc., but I am beginning to believe that one of my modules for the Verado is going bad. Is there a particular module you think I should replace first, such as the command module, since it's a bit pricey to guess and check modules without knowing which one is bad for sure? I also took the boat to the dealer and they recalibrated the DTS, and I am still having the problem. Thank you. So, Keenan, first thing, you should have asked the dealer, what's in the freeze frame. In the freeze frame is basically like all the codes that are stored. So it's going to tell you what kind of codes you're actually getting, like the true code, not the, universal, you're in Guardian mode code, but the, code with a number that tells you this is what's going on. And you need to know that before you go doing anything. If we're talking about a shifting issue, which it sounds like it is a shifting issue because everything's running fine, you can turn the engine on, idle, no problems. As soon as you shift it, boom, you get a code and it's messed up. Most likely it's in the shifting system, which generally, you said command module. A command module is the CCM that's in the console. Most likely that has not gone bad. Though they can go bad, it is part of the system, but it's probably not that. So the CCM, which is in the console, and the PCM, which is on the engine, 2 computers, engine computer, console computer. Whenever you move your handle at the console, that handle has a potentiometer in it. It tells the computer in the console to tell the engine computer to shift the engine, the shift actuator, which shifts the engine. So the handle is in one position telling the computer where it's at, and this computer tells this computer to do this action. If these two don't line up, like let's say you put it into forward and this computer tells this computer to shift and it tries to shift, but the shift actuator doesn't move or it moves slower than it is supposed to, this computer is going to tell this one that we're not matching up. You said to shift, we didn't shift when we were supposed to shift, boom, you got a code. So, like, let's say going back to the corrosion issue we were talking about earlier and the shift shaft. If the shift shaft is being jammed up and not turning, or it's requiring a lot of amperage or more power out of the shift actuator for it to shift, then that's going to have a delayed shift, which is going to throw your code, because your computer in the console is telling the computer on the engine to do something, and it's not doing it when it's supposed to. So boom, it's going to throw a code, which is going to push you into guardian mode, because as soon as you lose control, like that's like top priority. Like having control over the engine is top priority. If the engine computer doesn't think you have control of the engine, boom, guardian mode all day, because if you don't have control, you can't shift, you can't throttle. That's a big no-no. If there's someone in the water, you lose control, the engine's in gear, and someone gets hurt, that's a safety concern, big issue. So anything control related, big problem. I wouldn't go switching out any kind of computer modules or any of that stuff until you were able to 100% check. One is the engine shifting properly when you disconnect it from the shift actuator. And then two, what's the actual code on the engine? Like, you need to know what the actual code, what's actually causing it. Just going into guardian mode, and I'm surprised that the dealership didn't look at the freeze frame and say, oh, you've got this code or that code, and then you can actually test. Like, you can run some tests, but most likely it could be an engine harness, it could be one of the modulars, it could be the CCM harness in the front, it could be the control box. Like, there's a lot of components that it could be. And without testing everything, it's going to get way expensive. So I would definitely probably try and have a dealer look at it, because that's definitely a system that could cost you a lot of money really quickly, and you do not want that.